Kan dere høre meg alle sammen? Er det høyt? Vi tenker å starte snart, så hvis alle kan begynne å sette seg ned, så begynner vi snart. Så. Test, test, test. Test, test. Er det noen her som ikke forstår engelsk? Do you understand English? Yes. Great, fantastic. We're going to do this in English then. No problem. So, yeah, I just wanted to wait a couple of more minutes. Or actually, let's see. Yeah, some people will probably be late. But we're going to start very soon. Unmute. Great. So I just wanted to say a couple of words before we get started. And I'm a little bit nervous, so I'm going to talk very fast. And if I do that, I'm going to try to stop me or someone just wave when it goes too fast. So first of all, welcome to JAMstack Oslo. I'm really happy so many people could show up. It's more than 10. And I just wanted to say first just a couple of things around the JAMstack meetup. So we started it at the end of December because we wanted to nurture a community around the JAMstack tech and all of the great stuff that's going on specifically in Oslo, but there's also a lot of cool stuff happening around the country. So we hope to have a meetup that's overlapping with all of the cool stuff going around or happening in Oslo. And we hope to have different people come, but the format is basically the last Tuesday of the month. We're going to have a talk, but we're also going to try to have other types of events, some less structured, more social. And yeah, so we are very open to collaborate. So if you want to host the event, do you want to talk, reach out to me or to Knut, who should be somewhere here. Yeah, there, with the recording stuff over there. So that's about the format. And then I have some practical information. The emergency exit is on that side. In the unlikely case we have an alarm because of the food or fire, we'll just walk out in a slow tempo there. And I wanted to thank the people at Sanity for being very generous and hosting us here. And they are also very experienced with video, recording equipment, like the mic I'm holding in my hand, and yeah, everything around here, basically. So that's very nice of them. Thanks a lot. And Sanity is also providing beer and other types of beverages. And Nicholas and my sister are making waffles for us over there. So please get your fix. Go there. Remember to get some sugar during the breaks. We haven't decided when the breaks are yet, but we'll let you know. You'll know when they are. So, yeah, and again, we really want to have a collaborative community. So if you have any suggestions, improvements, feedback, let us know. This is the first event of the year. We hope to have 11 more events, and we want to improve on what's good, and then do less of the bad stuff, basically. So. Yeah, and this event is being streamed by the people at ByteConf in collaboration with Knut over there. So people in the chat, hello, if you can see me. Remember to be interactive. And Knut is going to watch out for questions, and we're going to try to queue them up. So if anyone here has a question, please try to go to the mic so people in the stream can actually hear it, or we'll try to repeat it. So, but the mic area would be nice. Otherwise, we'll have to disconnect the mic. If you have any questions, feel free to use the mic or ask me in person or Knut there, and also on the meetup. Yeah, we also have a Discord, and the link is on the meetup page. So I'd like to hand it off to Benedicte, who's gonna talk about her Gatsby plugin. So it's gonna be fun. Where's Benedicte? Yeah, there. Let me mute this.
Okay. Yes, so, hello. My name is Benedicte. Into the, over here. This is where the speaker should stand. Okay. Again, yeah. So, yeah, as I said, my name is Benedicte, and I've been a web developer or on and off for about 20 years now, I guess. And last week, I officially released my first open source project. It's the Gatsby Remark Oembed plugin, and it's a sub-transformer plugin for the Remark transformer plugin. So what does it do? So what it does, it finds and transforms Oembed links into its embedded counterpart. So as you see there on the left, I guess, it's a Twitter link, which is one Oembed provider. And on the right, you see the actual embedded tweet on an example blog I've made. So does everyone know what Oembed links are? No. So back in the day, I used to do a lot of WordPress. And for a long time there, you could just paste one of these links into the editor, and it would transform itself into the HTML or the embedded counterpart. And when I started with Gatsby, I thought, oh, this is cool. So how does it do this? And that's when I found out that most of these content sites have what's called Oembed links. So Instagram, Twitter, Reddit, and there's like a million, YouTube, Vimeo, there's a million others. And there's a place called Oembed.com where they have a list of all the different schemas for Oembed links and the endpoints you should ask to get the embedded counterpart back. So that's what my plugin does. It was a pretty slow start because, oh well, you've seen it. It was a pretty slow start because, as I found out with open source, the Gatsby core had a bug in it from, I guess I started in October and the bug was introduced in November, and then 2 weeks ago it was solved. And this was in minor versions, so it was not like it was planned. I guess I never planned bugs, but it took a while to get back. Luckily, though, I had Amy from Australia, who was my first fan, probably still the only fan. So she used it and stayed on an older Gatsby version and gave me lots of feedback, which was very helpful to actually, keep on developing this when I couldn't release it. And then a week and a half ago, I actually released it and even got my first pull request because as I updated the name of the plugin, I added @Raae as a scoped NPM package in the beginning. I hadn't updated the documentation, of course. So he made a pull request for that, and I'm very thankful, and even made a blog post on Dev2 about how important all open source contributions are. So that's why I'm here today, just to let you know it's out there, and I hope that you test it out and start filing lots and lots of bug reports, and hopefully pull requests if you find a solution to the bug reports you're filing. And I hope this is the beginning of a longer open source adventure. And maybe together we could make some more source plugins for Norwegian open datasets or other types of plugins. I would be very happy to keep on making plugins for Gatsby. Yes, that's it. And what is I don't have the time, but is there time for questions, or should we take a break? Questions? Any questions? You don't have to ask questions. I don't bite. You can talk to me after over a waffle. Would anyone be interested in a longer talk at some point about what, like the technical aspects of the plugin? Yep. I asked Knut for 5 minutes, so I tried to keep it short. Well, check it out on GitHub. Huh? GitHub, Raae. So, well, I don't have my GitHub here, but I'm Raae on Twitter and GitHub, and I'm Raae Codes on Instagram. So, yep, no questions. Let's have some waffle then, if it's time for that.
Hello. So we have to wait until 7:30 to actually start the next talk because our followers on the stream have been given that time. So grab some waffles and some drinks while we wait. Get some coffee as well. Hello. 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 All right, I think we're good to go. It's time to get started with a great Gatsby talk. Thanks everyone for showing up. It's really good to see so many people in the very first meetup. And thanks for the waffles. That's pretty awesome. So I'm going to talk about what Gatsby is and how to use it and how it kind of works on from a bird's eye view, kind of. I'm also going to get a bit into some of the pain points that I encountered when I was first trying it out. So I'm Espen, and this is my dog, Kokos. It's one of our office dogs. I'm a developer at Sanity.io, which is it's like a hosted backend for structured content. And we also have a real-time collaborative editing headless experience for editing that content, and it hooks up to that backend. So if you need a really cool backend for your next project or a headless CMS, check us out at Sanity.io. But I'm here to talk about Gatsby, and I'm not an expert at Gatsby. We've been making a Gatsby source plugin for Sanity over the past few weeks. And that's why I've sort of been looking into the sort of the internals and what this is all about. And I'm wearing a Gatsby t-shirt, so that must account for something, I guess. The name doesn't really have any, it's just a name, it doesn't have any relation to the book or the movie. It's a static site generator, and it is just what it says, it generates static sites for you. It differs a bit from other static site generators like Jekyll or Hugo, if you worked with those, in that it's not fully static. It also has a client context of a sort. So it has this JavaScript part where you can do all sorts of regular JavaScript client-side things. And it uses React behind the scenes. So you can use the React that you usually work with to build the pages that you want, and you can use the same component model that you love from before. And incidentally, React also uses Gatsby for their website and documentation, so it's gone like full circle, which is kind of fun. And it uses GraphQL internally for querying for data, which is a pretty weird choice. But it doesn't really require to have a hosted API or anything to actually use it, and I'll get into how that works in a bit. One of the other cool things is that it has a rich plugin ecosystem, and those plugins can do things like retrieving data from different sources. So our Sanity plugin is one of those, but you can also grab things from markdown files on your hard drive or some other source on the net, like a RSS feed or anything. It also does image processing and markdown analysis and processing, and it even hooks into like client-side stuff, like adding Google Analytics to your site in a way that's non-blocking and really super optimal, of course. And you can also add like things like offline support through service workers. So it's really cool. And it allows you to build stuff like these sites, which I just pulled from the Gatsby Showcase website. Just websites. But if we go back and look at sort of the way that these are built, they would normally be built using, or way back they would be built using static HTML. And then we took this weird journey down using like dynamic sites for like Perl and PHP and Node.js for creating those websites. So on request, you would get some data from a database or a cache and then render that using some kind of template. And now we're moving back to static again, which is kind of funny. And some of you probably already know why we want to move back to static, or some of the reasons why, but I still want to iterate on the main point, and which is that it's just blazing fast with static sites. All of these websites that I've shown are just really, really fast. So that's sort of the bird's eye view of what Gatsby is. I'm going to get into more of the why you should use it, which also explains more of the reasons, I guess, for what it is, or it explains in further detail what it is. So as I said, it's really, really fast. And out of the box, it gives you some really awesome experiences. This Lighthouse audit, for instance, shows the official Gatsby site, and it has really high scores for performance and progressive web apps and accessibility and all that kind of good stuff. But this isn't something that you sort of have to work on. You usually just get that out of the box when you set up a new Gatsby site, because it's like built with performance in mind. And the way it does that is, of course, one thing is to generate static HTML, which is like the obvious thing, of course. And because delivering static content is really fast, those are delivered to your browser really fast. There's no database lookups to do because it's all done in build time instead of in runtime. But it also had a couple of other like really interesting features. So one of those are code splitting, which is something that you can do on your own if you're generating JavaScript applications. It's basically about just figuring out which parts of the page is needed, or which parts of the JavaScript that you're loading is actually needed for the particular page that you're loading or viewing. But Gatsby does this out of the box. Since it has the knowledge of which pages you're generating, it can actually automatically code split for you. So you can still create these really dynamic websites that uses React under the hood. You can have all the same dynamic features of making whatever like really complex flows that you want. But out of the box, it'll still be code splitting those into separate like small JavaScript bundles. It also does inlining of CSS, which means that it takes the critical parts of your CSS and basically moves it from an external style sheet and into the head of your website or HTML page, which means that it's generating less requests to the backend, and the browser doesn't have to wait for that external link to resolve before it can start rendering the layout. Which is, it's kind of weird, but it ends up being faster most of the time because there's no network issues. It doesn't have any head-of-line blocking that you might encounter with HTTP. So it's really, really fast. The things that it does is it has this server worker magic that you can plug into. So when you're loading a site or a page, it actually knows which other pages you're likely to hit. Like it knows all the other pages that exists, and it can start preloading the JavaScript for those pages. So if you have a link to 10 different pages on that page, it'll start preloading in the background all the JavaScript that it needs for those. So it's really fast because when you click on that link, it already has that JavaScript bundle and the data that it needs in JSON format, and it just shuffles that right into your browser. So it's really fast. But there's a lot of other cool things about Gatsby that I'll just quickly go over. Convenience is one of my favorite parts of Gatsby. There's all these tooling things that's really quick to get hung up on if you want to try to get all these up and running in a most optimal way. There's like Webpack and Babel and whatever CSS solution you want to use, like Sass or Less or Post CSS. There's TypeScript if you want to use that. There's Remark for parsing Markdown. All kinds of stuff. And it can be a real hassle to set up all that stuff yourself. But with Gatsby, it configures most of that out of the box. And for the things that it doesn't, there's usually a plugin that you can just install, and it will hook into the different tools, like extend the Webpack configuration. So it's really cool. And one of the other things is that dynamic sites are really hard to do. So if you want to make a the most optimal website that you can make that is loading dynamic data, there's a whole bunch of things that you have to figure out. You have to fire off requests to the server, and then while that is loading, you want to show a spinner usually. But you don't want to show that spinner right away, because if the data loads within just a very short period of time, you get that flash of the spinner, and then it goes away. And even if you defer that and wait like 300 milliseconds and then show the spinner, it can still appear after 320 milliseconds, and then you're still showing that little flash of that spinner. And then if that network request fails, then you probably want to retry that request. But if you don't have any internet connection in that period of time, what do you do then? Do you like show an error message? And should that be global or just scope to the particular part of the page that you're loading the data for? There's all these kind of things that you have to worry about. And that's one of the things that's really nice with Gatsby, is that because you're building it all at build time, you don't have to worry about that dynamic part. It's all buffered, and you can always, because in the background it preloads these things, there's less chance of something breaking, and it can retry loading the data and the JavaScript in the background if something fails. So it does that automatically for you. Also, there's this really cool React component called gatsby-image, which uses all sorts of really fancy loading techniques in order to make your images load really fast and also make them sharper. So it does this by lazy loading. So while you're scrolling the page, it'll start loading only the images that you actually need. And on top of that, you can also plug in all sorts of really cool functionality, like you can generate a low-quality image placeholder, which is like a 20 by 20 pixel version of that image, which you then blur or scale up and then blur. So it looks like sort of the outline of the image, which uses really like a very few amount of bytes, which you then encode into the page as base64 data. And then while that image is loading, you're showing that blurred version, but once you're sort of scrolling into view, that image will appear in its like clear form and just sort of like fade in. And it also does supports things like specifying a source set, so you can give it different DPI factors, so you can load the image. You specify that you want an image in 200 pixels that are 200 pixels wide. And then if you're on a mobile device, for instance, then you have a high resolution screen, so you can actually load something that is 600 pixels wide, but it was shown as 200 pixels physically, sort of. Yep. And also it supports other formats like WebP. So if you're on a Chrome device or something that's using Chrome, then it knows that it can load a WebP version if that's supported. Also, scaling is ridiculously easy because it's just static files, so you can basically host it anywhere. You just build this thing and then you push it to a web server, and then you're pretty much done. Anything can basically host a Gatsby site. There's no magic needed. All the things that are required is basically to be able to serve static files. And there's also some underappreciated things, just the value of the ecosystem as well. Is that if you keep using all these integrations, like the image plugin that I talked about, if every source exposes their images in the same way, then you can hook that up easily into Gatsby-image, and you don't have to sort of worry about that for each different source that you're getting the content from. How am I going to be able to load this in the most optimal way? You just use the Gatsby sort of convention to get that out of the box. There's also some really cool things that's coming out from, there's a couple of guys from Google that made a library called Gatsby.js, which uses Google Analytics data and machine learning to figure out what is the most optimal way of loading JavaScript and different pages. And it actually hooks into the Webpack configuration to load that in that specific order. So if you're going to Sanity.io's front page, and then we know that from analytics data we can say that you usually go to the pricing page and then to the getting started page, and you can optimize for that so that users on a slow network will always select the most critical resources first, which is really, really awesome. And all of this kind of just ties in really nicely. So hopefully you're convinced there's some good arguments in there for why you should be using Gatsby. So I'm going to take a look at sort of the basics of how you build a site, or what the very bare bones looks like. On a high level, you want to just fetch a bunch of data from a source and then generate pages based on that data. So from your perspective, like a regular developer perspective, you want to start with setting up a configuration. There's a file called gatsby-config in these Gatsby projects. And it has usually set it up with a plugin, such as the Gatsby source sanity plugin in this case. And you give it whatever configuration it needs. So in this case, project ID and a dataset. Once that's up and running, you can run Gatsby develop, and it will set up the Gatsby development server, which it will set up this thing which is called GraphQL, which is like a query editor or runner for GraphQL. And you usually want to start here by trying to figure out how to query for the data that you need for the page that you're building, or how to get the data that you need to know which pages to build. So for a blog post, like a blog, you would fetch all the different blog posts. And that's usually there's a convention in Gatsby that if you want to fetch multiple items of a certain type, it's called all something. So all films in this case, or all blog posts or something. And once you have that, you can start creating this this function called create pages, which is exported in a file called gatsby-node.js. It's a sort of a weird name, but it just means that this thing is running in Node. There's the Gatsby browser, which is what runs in the browser, and there's Gatsby Node, which runs in the Node.js. And yeah, you just define a function called create pages, and that gets a bag of parameters or arguments that includes a function that allows you to run GraphQL queries. So if you take that query that you generated in the previous example, not this example, but something that you would get out of this, and plot it in here, for instance, all blog posts, and then I want to provide a filter. And these filters are also sort of the same convention if you're using Gatsby. So if you, regardless of source, you're usually familiar with the syntax of filtering. So in this case, I want to filter on the field called slug, which does not equal null. And then you get the edges of that connection, and the node, which is the actual blog post, and then the ID and the slug. This edges and node thing is a weird thing that they're borrowed from a framework called Raae, which is just defining how to do paginated results in GraphQL. It doesn't really matter if, usually you can just fetch all the blog posts unless you have a really big site, and it'll be available as edges and node. Then once you have got all the data that you want, you just want to iterate over each item in that list and call the create page action. And the create page action it needs as a minimum a path for where you want what the URL should be. So blog node.slug, for instance, and a component, which is the path to a component, not the actual instance of a component, which is a React component that's used to render that page. And then the context and the data that you put in there will be exposed to the GraphQL query as well as to the template in question. So I'll show that here. This is the actual template component. So it has a default export, which is the React component. And it gets the data, which is the result of the GraphQL query, as well as the page context, which is whatever you passed it in this step. So in this case, slug. And you render some React component from that, which will be the actual page. And you can then, in addition to that, export a query, which is a GraphQL query. And Gatsby automatically just parses all the JavaScript files in your project looking for these exports, which is kind of weird, but that's what it does. It looks for anything that's using the GraphQL tagged template literal, so you can actually call this constant whatever. You can call it page query or some weird thing, and it'll still pick it up and run it at build time. And as you see, it's using the $slug, which is the argument that it's getting from the context. So whatever I passed in the previous thing is passed in here, and I can use that to filter. So in this case, I'm selecting blog post. I'm querying for blog post, which is a single, it's not prefixed by all, so it'll be a single blog post. And then I'm saying, fetch whatever blog post that matches the filter of slug equals $slug. And then select all the different fields that you want from that. Now you could also basically pass all of this data down in context, but there's it's like a convention of trying to keep each component or each page sort of self-contained, so that you just look at the query and see all the data that it's getting, and keep the actual page building to a minimum. So that's the basics. So by running this, you would get like a very bare bones page. You'd still need to actually implement the actual rendering, of course, but that's just regular React. You can use the data that you retrieved and render pages. So not to show like all the good bits, I would want to show some of the pain points, or talk about some of the pain points as well. There's schemas. This is my pet peeve in Gatsby, is that it's using GraphQL, and GraphQL is pretty strict. If you can't query for fields that are not defined in a schema. So Gatsby doesn't really know about schemas. It just knows that it's got a whole lot of sources, and when you retrieve data from those sources, it has to actually infer a schema from the data that you're getting. And that's not a problem if what you're retrieving is just markdown files, because it's pretty standard, a similar structure for all of this. But if you're using something like that has a user declared schema, so you can make all sorts of things with it, so things like sanity. You can define that schema in sanity, and Gatsby won't know about those fields, and there's no way to declare those fields to Gatsby. So it has a sort of inference versus strict typing issue going on. And you end up with these situations where if you have a blog post that has a cover image, and you publish a blog post that has a cover image, and you use that in a template, and then you remove the last blog post that has a cover image, then Gatsby no longer knows that there is a cover image field, because it's not present in any of the documents. So this is some of the things that make it a little bit hard to work with. And a lot of the other source plugins out there, it tries to says that the official way to solve this right now is basically just to create a content entry for each of your types that has all the different fields, and then you just have to filter that out when you're querying for stuff. So it's not optimal, and there's some work in the community, luckily, to actually be able to provide a strict GraphQL schema if you know the schema up front, which will solve all of these issues. And Gatsby is also really, really fast, but it's also slow. And I'm talking about the build process. If you can just, the main point is that it doesn't have incremental builds yet. So if you have a site with, say, 10,000 pages, and you only changed one of those pages, Gatsby doesn't know that only one of them has changed. So it needs to download all of the data, it needs to generate all the pages or all the nodes, and then see that, okay, there's only a single page that has actually changed, and then generate that page. But it still takes a lot of time. And also the build process in itself can be pretty slow. So if you have a lot of pages, you might run into build times that are up in the multiple minutes, which isn't good if you have something that changes really rapidly. It also have, if you have things like scaling images locally, that sort of just increases the problem, because it has to actually pull down all the source images and then scale those to the dimensions that you have provided within your queries. And yeah, it takes time. And also in development mode, if you're changing data constantly, then you run into a problem where you have to restart the development server to actually get the latest updates, which is kind of a pain to do all the time. So yeah. So to toot our own horn, we have to have some pitch here. We've made this plugin, And it tries to solve some of the issues as far as we can from our side. So one of the things that we try to tackle is the speed aspect. And we've implemented, instead of looping through and paginating results from when you query for data or when you fetch data from Sanity, we basically just export all your documents in a stream. So you're just using a single API call to our servers, and then we just get all the documents, and then we create nodes for those in a streaming fashion. So it's really fast. It doesn't have to wait for each page to return before it proceeds. And we also have our asset CDN, which serves images, which is able to scale images and transform image to different formats on the fly. So we actually have all the features that Gatsby-image uses internally. We have that on our CDN. That wasn't built for Gatsby. We just actually incidentally had the same features. But it results in the nice thing that you don't actually have to pull down images in order to scale them to the format that you need. So it's really fast. It doesn't have to do any image manipulation during build. And Sanity has a GraphQL API that's in beta right now, and using that we can partially solve the schema problem that I talked about. It uses this hack called example values, which is basically that we ask for the GraphQL schema for your dataset, and we get back a very strict defined GraphQL schema. And then we generate mock values or example values for all the fields within those types. So we see that something is a string, we generate a string, and if it's a number, it's a number, and we iterate over all of those things. And then we add those as if they were actual content pieces, and then we wait for Gatsby to tell us that, okay, we've generated a schema. None of this is, of course, official and documented. It's just it's a very hacky solution, but it works. And once that schema has been generated, then we actually remove those. And then Gatsby creates pages, and those nodes that we created are not returned within that result set. The problem is once that's done, it actually has a second pass of updating the schema. So we have to actually add all those values again, and then it generates a new schema, and then we have to remove them again. But yeah, all of this happens sort of behind the scenes. So all you have to do is make sure that you deployed a GraphQL API that matches your dataset schema, and we take care of that. It only works on the root level. It doesn't work deep into structures. That's a limitation of Gatsby at this point. But as I said, they are working on a fix. There's some ongoing efforts, and that's going to solve all of these issues. So it's going to be. That's obviously something that we're going to hop onto once that's available. We also wanted to tackle the iteration speed and restart issue of the Gatsby development server. And we did this by introducing what we call watch mode, which basically allows you to instantly see the changes that you make while you're in development mode. And it's a nice bonus feature. This will actually work with the Gatsby preview product that Gatsby is launching in a couple of months, hopefully, or I don't know the time frame, but soon. Yeah, I think I'm just gonna show a quick demo of how it actually works or how it looks. So this is Sanity running on the right, and this is Gatsby frontend on the left in watch mode. So as you can see, I'm adding some data, and while I'm typing in all these social things are appearing on the screen, and I can upload images, and it's all pretty real time. Oh, sorry. There's yeah, I'm just introducing. I'm trying to explain it in a very. It's much more. Oh, sorry. Okay, now it's playing. Yeah. So as you can see, as I'm adding things, it's updating. Isn't it? It's down there. There's my avatar. I can change some backgrounds. Yeah. And this is actually showing a list of content, but it's waiting for something to have a slug. So as you can see, I have no slug here, so it's not... Thing is still sort of being added into Gatsby behind the scenes, but it's not actually matching the query that I had set up. So once I generate that, it will appear. You can see the little flash. That's when it generates a new page. It will reload in a weird fashion. And I'll start writing in the body field here soon, which isn't going to show up here because this is just the front page. Yeah, this is using something that a standard that we have called the portable text, which is like a JSON representation of rich text, which allows you to have like bold and italic, and more importantly, insert things like images and more rich embeds into your structured content in a fashion that looks like a rich text editor would normally be. Yeah. And once that's done, I can hopefully show you. Yeah, okay, I'll add some images. And just to make it very meta, so this is a YouTube video I'm showing you, and I'm gonna insert a YouTube video into the YouTube video. And it's gonna be about Gatsby, of course. There. So as you can see, it's very real time, and I don't think I know that there's no other source plugins that's able to match this sort of real time way of previewing content. So we're very proud of that. Yeah. So that's basically all I have. I'm gonna take it into. I'll let this play out, and I can take some questions if there's any. Yes. Okay. Should we do this first?
No, just a question to the video. This is happening without you publishing?
Yes. So the source plugin also has a feature. Oh, sorry. The question is, this is happening without me actually publishing. And yes, it's there's an option in the source plugin that allows you to overlay drafts on top of the published version. So this is something you would use in development mode, just to be able to quickly see how changes to the content would actually appear. But you could also set up Sanity to work in live edit mode, so it doesn't have to actually manually click the publish button, which is of course a bit dangerous default. But if you're just playing around in development, that might work. There's a question from our stream. Right, so the question is coming from a background of HTML and CSS. There's, when you're moving into Gatsby and React territory, there's so many different ways to style components, and if I have any recommendations. And I don't really have all that much recommendations. I've tried a bunch of them, and there's always something that I don't really like about some of them. Like there's always good things and bad things about them. I really like the CSS in JS approaches because it allows me to just work in JavaScript and sort of use the merge things that I prefer. But at the same time, there's a real value in just using CSS as they're intended. In Sanity, we've gone for CSS modules, which is kind of nice because it allows you to work in a sort of object-oriented fashion with CSS. But it's not perfect. There's also some drawbacks to that. But yeah, there's also all sorts of really interesting things like Glamour and other things that I really want to try out, but I can't really recommend a specific one. Sorry. I have the same problem, I guess that's the answer. Yes? Yeah, so the question. Yeah. So the question is, do we need Gatsby preview if we have this watch mode, or vice versa? I would say so, because Gatsby preview is intended for editors to be able to see your changes in sort of more like a publishing fashion. So you edit some content and you want to rapidly see how that's going to look on the site. Whereas this is more intended towards like development mode while you're setting up and developing the site. You could also set up this in, or Knut actually set this up on Heroku to actually run like a development server of Gatsby. But it's quite heavy on resources. Gatsby uses a lot of memory when it's building, so if you have a large site, it will quickly drain like a small dyno. So you'll actually have, you'll need quite a bit of like server things. And also Gatsby develop is probably more meant as running in development mode and not in like a production setting. So I'm not sure how it's going to scale over time running consistently like on a server. I can't really answer that, but it's, yeah. I'd say Gatsby Preview is more geared towards that production setting. Yes?
If one should like want to try out Gatsby in a really easy way,
Yeah. So the question from marketing is if I wanted to try out Gatsby Insanity in a really like cool context in an easy way, how would I go about doing that? Is that right? Yeah. We've made an example for setting up like a company website that both has a Gatsby frontend and a Sanity Studio. That's already configured, and it's going to be really easy to deploy to things like Netlify or Now. So you can check that out. It's on our GitHub, github.com/sanity-io. I'm not sure what the repo name is because it's like 200 characters long, but blame Evan for that. Yeah, or Gatsby, yeah, sanity.io/blog. We'll probably have the link as well. All right. Any other questions? Yes?
I don't think it's... I was wondering, all the queries you make, where do you... I would bet you resolve them somewhere, like on the Gatsby Node.js or something.
Oh, right. So the question is, all the queries that you write, where are they sort of resolved? I glossed over that. So the queries are actually run in memory. So Gatsby, for most plugins. So for most plugins, it actually downloads all the data that's available and adds those as sort of what Gatsby called nodes. And when you query for data, that's actually happening just towards an in-memory database, actually a Redux store, actually, inside of Node. Some plugins, like there's a GraphQL plugin, which actually just mounts directly to a remote GraphQL API. And that will actually, once you actually run the queries, those will go out and contact the remote GraphQL API and let that handle the actual resolving. But in most cases, it actually happens in memory, so it sort of pre-caches all the data. It doesn't just generate the data for the queries that are being run. Does that answer your question? Yes? All right. I'll be available for questions or... Oh, sorry, there's one more.
Yeah, I would like to ask what you would choose over Gatsby or, for example, Next. Because I saw in Sanity there were some examples with Sanity and Next and Sanity Gatsby.
Mm-hmm.
So what you would choose, because I made some search about it, in both of them are like pluses and minuses.
Yeah. So the question is, we have a couple of examples, both using Gatsby and using Next, and which one I would use. There's like benefits of both. We have like our Sanity.io site is using Next.js now, which is a good choice for that because it has a lot of dynamic content. We use Sanity as our backend, of course, which allows us to do A/B testing, for instance. So we based on like the user, we fetch one iteration of the site and use that, and that's really hard, or kind of hard to replicate in Gatsby. And if you have something that changes really rapidly, that's not a good example of the Sanity site, but if you have like a feed that gets new items all the time, then I probably wouldn't use Gatsby because of the build time is quite high. But if you have like a company website that usually it has like a blog and all the people that work there, and you want that to be really like quick and snappy and like really instant, then I think Gatsby is probably the best choice for that. But it really depends on the use case, I would say.
I searched about like changing schemas,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a case with Gatsby, and I was like not sure if I should.
Yeah, there's a lot of traction around Gatsby, and I think a lot of people are trying to fit everything into Gatsby these days, which might work and it might not. So someone that has a lot of, like there's someone that was using Sanity with Gatsby for generating 3,000 different pages, and his build time was, I think it was like 10 plus minutes. But then he switched to our new plugin, and then it was down to 2 minutes. But it's still two minutes, so if those pages changes like all the time, then it's still two minutes to wait before that build actually like finishes. So yeah, it depends on your use case, I guess. But it's much easier to host it and to scale it if it's static, obviously. So that's also a factor to think about. Yes.
I don't know if you said anything about this, but if you use Sanity and you update something in Studio and you publish a new article,
Mm-hmm.
do you have to rebuild Gatsby and redeploy it in the static files, or does it do that automatically?
So the question is, if I in Sanity make or edit some content or make some new content and then click publish, will my site sort of just reflect that change, or does it have to rebuild? And yes, it has to rebuild, unless you're using watch mode. Oh yeah, you're using so the normal way to trigger those builds is to set up a webhook, so that whenever something new is published, something will trigger a build on Netlify or Seat or Now or something to actually build that site. But yeah, it'll still go through the build process. And hopefully that will be much snappier once Gatsby is working on they're working on incremental builds. So at some point it'll just be able to just generate the pages that actually changed instead of all of the pages. But we'll have to wait a bit more until that's ready. Yes.
Follow-up to that.
Yes.
If I have 10,000 pages in Sanity and I change the type of one and it has to rebuild, and then I need to change another character, will it use all my quota on Sanity? If it does like query for every page.
Yeah, so the question is, if I have 10,000 pages or content pieces in Sanity and then change title of one of those, will it then use a whole lot of API requests to build those? And no, it's actually using, for each build, it's only using 2 API requests. It's only using 1 API request to get the stream of the documents, and that's just a single API request, and then 1 for the GraphQL API to see all the fields. Beyond that, it's just the images. So, and that's not API calls, but just like bandwidth for the images that you're using. And we'll also be providing an option to actually download the images if you want to host them yourself at some point. But right now we're just using the Sanity asset CDN. So we're just basically 2 calls per build. So it's quite efficient. All right. Yes.
Dynamics or static sites, which are mostly static but have dynamic parts or
Yeah.
dynamic endpoints.
Mm-hmm.
What's like a great way to do that now?
So the question is, it's sites that are both static and dynamic. Like there's some parts that are dynamic and some, but other parts are static. And what's the good pattern for those? That's actually really easy with Gatsby because it's all just React. So you can still generate a page that uses a component, React component that still uses all the same like data loading patterns that you're used to. So you can still make like a basic page, but have a feed on the side that's actually loading data dynamically from an API endpoint.
So my question is rather about like deployments and where do you
Yeah.
host that endpoint? Because
Right.
if you use something like
Mhm.
Shopify, maybe you have like functions, or rather if you use Sanity,
Mm-hmm.
where do you put your dynamic endpoint code thing?
Yeah. So the question, a follow-up question is, what about the backend or the API for that? So sort of where do you get that content from, and how do you feed that into the site? So with Sanity, you'd just use our client to fetch that using a Grok query, and or GraphQL if you want, yeah, to actually query for the data and then render that on the page. If you're using a custom API, then yeah, you have to handle that somehow. You could either make like a node server that both serves static content that just basically serve all the files that Gatsby has, and then have like a /API endpoint where you can make custom endpoints, or you can outsource that to like a serverless provider like Netlify or Lambda or whatever you want to use there. But yeah, backend is still going to be something that's up to you.
What do you recommend?
I would recommend using Sanity, of course. Yeah, so if you have custom code, then I would probably recommend one of the providers. It's hard to say. I have a soft spot in my heart for Now, like Seeds Now, because it's really simple to set that up. But there's there's all sorts of like if you have a little more time, then I guess AWS Lambda is probably quite stable, and Google Cloud Functions works really nice as well. But yeah, it's just kind of what you're used to and the trade-offs of all those different serverless technologies. It's hard. Yeah. Any other questions? You can come talk to me after, because I like to talk about this stuff, so don't be scared. All right? I'm not sure if Alex is around and wants to do an outro.
Yeah, let's see. Test. Yeah, it's still working. So once again, thanks a lot for coming, and thanks to Sanity for hosting and the speakers for presenting their topics. It's interesting. I'm definitely going to check out Gatsby. I haven't used it. I hope some of you who haven't used it yet are going to try it. And maybe also try Sanity if you haven't tried that yet. And there's a lot of waffles left. So yeah, please help us out in eating them, or take some of them with you. You could have them later tonight, or maybe for lunch tomorrow, breakfast, you know. So we would appreciate your help, and for everyone on the live stream there, sorry, thanks for watching. And yeah, again, we're working on the next meetups, so we have invited a couple of people. I'm not going to reveal who, but if you join us on Discord, you can find out who. And just scroll through the timeline.